This is a holiday weekend, so we really appreciate you giving up your afternoon to this. So I'm just going to start out with our preface that we are two women who have extensive personal and professional experience with substance abuse and addictions. We wrote a book, Addiction, One Cause, One Solution, that describes an evolutionary new understanding of mental health and recovery that we call the outside in, or the inside out understanding. This understanding has helped us, as well as tens of thousands around the world, to have greater peace of mind and joy in their lives. The book and this program are for people no matter where they are in their recovery. If you or someone you love is newly sober, struggling with stabilizing your sobriety, or if you have been sober for some time but may experience depression, anxiety, or other types of dis-ease, you may find the simple wisdom of this understanding to be liberating. We'll start each session, as Christian said a minute ago, by going through a section of the book to try and expand and clarify on what we've written. The more quietly you listen, the more you will hear and see. We will have plenty of time at the end of our talking for questions and comments. However, we will stop recording at that point to give people some privacy where they feel they can share freely and openly. Okay, and then the recordings will be available online following the sessions. So I guess Christian's going to kick us off today. We're going to talk, our subject today on session 2 is what the difference between principles and theories and why that's so important. So Christian's going to kick us off.
Thanks very much. Sorry, people are joining left, right, and centre, so I'm kind of working the controls as well. Okay. Yeah, a very warm welcome to all of you, and thanks so many of you for joining today. Bobby, I'm just going to everyone's cameras off at this point. We'll explain why. So I'm just going to stop your video just now. We'll bring you back on afterwards. But welcome, and it's lovely to see you. So I thought I might just start with a very brief part from the book, and it's from chapter 2, and it reads this: just as the disease model helped us realise the psychological innocence of the addict and was a step forward in our understanding of addiction, we have come to see that the inside-out understanding is the next evolution. This evolution is not a theory. It identifies observable psychological principles applicable to all, just as principles like gravity apply universally. Awareness of this is particularly helpful in the field of addiction recovery because it reveals that misunderstanding rather than disease is at the root of addiction. And Barbara's going to say a little bit more about the particular, theories in relation to addiction and going into the detail of the subject. But I thought it might be interesting just to kick off with that general question and the general answer to what is the difference between a principle and a theory. And some of the things that I came up with are that a principle is a discovery of how things work. It's a discovery of the kind of lowest common denominator. A principle is something that's universal. And so I was thinking about what are some examples of that. And some of the ones that I like to use are things like gravity, that obviously gravity has been around forever. And in fact, people have obviously known that if you drop something, it falls, it always goes down, it never goes up, that it's universal. But it was in observing an apple fall that Newton developed his theory of gravity, which is in fact a principle. That has come. It's kind of one of the bases. It's one of the laws, one of the 4 laws of physics that applies at all times. And other ones that I like to, I'm going to just maybe come back to this and touch on them a bit later. But another one that often occurs to me is if any of you did chemistry at school or know anything of chemistry, the periodic table is a list of all the elements that make up everything in our universe. now the person who discovered that table, who who kind of put them into that order and discovered the properties of the different elements, they didn't create the elements. All of those elements have been there since the Earth was created anyway. I don't, that's the limit of my astrophysics. But the fact of knowing that the fact of identifying that the lowest common denominators, that the smallest particles that are available, it had all sorts of implications. And I'm not going to go into, obviously, you'll be relieved to know the implications in the field of chemistry, but the same applies in the field of in the field of psychology or spirituality, which the three principles bring psychology and spirituality back together again. And it's really identifying the fundamental building blocks of what it is to be a human being, a spiritual being who's having a psychological experience. And just as in chemistry, once you understand what the basic building blocks are, things are revealed from that. There are implications from that, and so in the human system, and for it, one of the things it does is it takes things. It reveals what's possible and what's impossible. So one of the fundamental aspects of the three principles, or the inside out understanding, that we're focusing on very much in this first series of webinars is the role of thought. And the fundamental building block is that thought is the power. Thought is the capacity that we have to create life, or thought is the energy that is working through us, that is creating our experience moment to moment to moment. And once somebody sees that, so somebody sees the truth of it, then it becomes a game changer, because you don't need to worry about all the other things that don't cause our experience. We don't need to worry so much about what other people are doing, what the bank balance is, what the what the stock market's doing, or what other people are saying, and the weather, anything like that. Once we see that everything that we experience is a creation of thought in the moment, that thought in the moment is a constant energy running through, for each of us, running through us throughout the whole of our life, then there's only kind of one place to look. There's so much is kind of stripped away, and this is why we talk, and we'll talk more about this going forward, but we talk about this being a subtractive process, or subtractive psychology, because all the things that we might have been blaming for, say, unhappiness or addiction, such as it's in my genes, it's my childhood experience, I ran around with the wrong crowd, they're no longer true, and it boils down to a simple, although not always easy, but a simple truth that if we're using a substance addictively, or using a behavior addictively, it boils down to the simple truth that we've bought into a false belief that can do something for us, that it can improve our experience of life, or take away the pain of life, or something along those lines. And when I said it's simple, but it's not easy, that the theory is simple, and I think many of us on this call, and certainly speaking for myself, that the understanding how the principle works is one thing, but there's also a recognition that we don't get to change our thoughts. We don't get to force our thoughts to be different just by an effort of will. The power of thought, which is the stream of consciousness that's running through us, is not something that's in the control of our ego or our conscious mind. And so there's always an element of, for me, humility or grace in it, and the capacity to change, the capacity to see things differently, it comes in a moment of insight. But it's very helpful. It tends to my mind, it tends to make us more insight prone if we understand the process, if we understand what we're truly up against, that it's a principle of thought, that it's a fact of how things work, rather than somebody's good idea. So I was going to just refer to one thing from one of Sid Banks's book on this, the Missing Link, one of his several books. And again, it's just a very short piece. And I just thought I'd refer to this before I hand it back to you, Barbara. And what Sid says on page 52 is, when you start to see the power of thought and its relationship to your way of observing life, you will better understand yourself and the world in which you live. And that's it. So Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I really never gave much thought to this whole concept of principle versus theory. You know, it never really occurred to me that what we were dealing with in the addictions field or in the field of psychotherapy were theories. You know, again, as I've turned my attention to this and seen this more clearly, it's very clear. We touched on that a little bit last time, and I'm going to touch on it some more today. But I just wanted to talk again, just sort of expand a little bit on what Christian was saying about the difference between principles and theories. So to me, principles are like bedrock. They're unchanging. They're always true. As she said, they're observable. They're true for everyone. It's not like they're true for some people and they're not true for others. So it's like bedrock. It's like something you can really ground yourself in, that not only feels true, but is true. And the other thing about principles is that they explain things. You know, they're explanatory. Like, yeah, I see that now. That makes perfect sense. So many of the questions I've had in my career and in my life have just come into such clarity for me with this understanding of the principle of how our minds actually work, and that they only do work one way. And so principles are pre-existing, they're universal, they're always true, and they're a place you can sort of hang your hat and be sure your hat's still going to be there tomorrow. Now switch over to the whole concept of theories. That a theory, you know, again, in the field of psychotherapy, we have, you know, we're working with all kinds of theories. We're working with a model that has been developed over the past century, I guess, of a pathology-based model that includes in the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, which psychotherapists use and that we use in the field of addiction treatment, a lot of theories that are ever changing. You know, they change all the time. They're evolutionary. They're opinions. Theories are opinions. And the way that this became really clear to me was, some of you know this, I had a very severe case of neurological Lyme disease. And I was ill for quite a long time. And because we don't really have a real truth around what causes it or how to get rid of it, and there's so many bazillions of variables as to physical health and well-being and all of those things, but there are a heck of a lot of theories. And so when people who were struggling trying to get well, myself included, you know, would be so confused because the theories would change from person to person. Like, you must take antibiotics. You must take antibiotics for years. You know, no, you should never take antibiotics. Antibiotics are going to do away with the human race. You know, and you must do this. You must take probiotics. No, you should never take probiotics. You know, and so you're sort of sitting there with your head like spinning around 360. And in some ways, you know, it was also true within the field of addiction treatment, that we always we would give people things to hang their hat on that were not necessarily true. I used to call it the psychotherapy du jour. You know, we would, like in the field of psychotherapy, we'd have to go and get training. So every year you'd go to a new conference and you'd learn something new, like mindfulness or EMDR or whatever the new psychotherapy was. And then you come back and start working with your clients around that. Like, this is going to be the next best thing that's going to fix you and change you. And, you know, and most of my clients very willingly sort of went along for that ride until I got tired and they just jumped off and said, this really isn't doing much for me. But, you know, for the most part, we just kept evolving in what it was that was going to help. So when I came across this understanding, what happened for me was just this complete shift in away from searching to complete strength, foundational strength, and understanding that not only is this the only way it works, but it's the only way it's ever worked. And that just took all this stuff off my mind. It made the search go away. And we'll talk a lot more about that, as Christian referred to the subtractive psychology. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense now. That explains it. That explains why two people can have these feelings that are shifting from moment to moment, why you can love your job and hate your job within a 10-minute time frame, or love your spouse and want to choke the living daylights out of them, or your kids, you know, and oh, that's why this is happening this way. So the explanatory nature of it, the unchanging nature of it, just grounds us, I think, in a way that it didn't before. And that takes so much off our minds, and it helps us to look in the right direction. When you're looking in the wrong place for something, it's a long search. You're going to be searching forever. And most addicts would tell you they've been chasing the high, or they've been chasing the good feelings, or they've been chasing a better something to make them feel better for the entire course of their addiction, without a great deal of success, because we haven't been grounded in how it actually works and where feelings actually do come from. So that one understanding, and it is very simple, as Christian said, and very, very profound. Not always easy to see at first, because we sort of miss it, because it's so simple that it's kind of like you step over an ant on the floor, you just missed it. It's like, but once you shift your focus to seeing this, it's really transformational in a way that nothing I've ever seen has been. So just one other thing that I read this morning that I thought was really helpful is that what happens for most theories is that they can become entrenched presumptions. The theories can become entrenched presumptions, and then often, because they are presumed to be true, become prescriptive. Right? So you must do this. This is the way you need to do it. And, you know, again, in the field of, you know, as I look back now on my career, some of the things that I told people they needed to do, which was to absolutely, you had to go into your past, you had to examine all the things that had happened to you, because that was the way you were going to heal. That was an entrenched presumption that looked true to me. I didn't know it was a theory and that it was really made up. And it became prescriptive. Even when people's intuition and their instinct were screaming out, like, I don't want to go in the past. This is not going to be helpful to me. I would just keep prescribing it, because it was a theory that had become a truth to me, even though it wasn't true at that time. So that's the nice thing about a principle, is you don't have to worry about whether or not it's true. It just is true. Whether you believe it or not, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't require belief. You don't have to believe in gravity for it to be true. It just is. So that's what I have to say. So Christian, I don't know if you want to pick up on any of that.
Well, I mean, just very briefly, Barbara, I was going to say, I think I love that thing about entrenched presumptions. And for me, in many ways, the real the real toiling and struggle happened after I got sober, because I had so much denial in my days of drinking. And but the entrenched presumption was that you have to work hard. You have this condition, lady. You are broken, and you have to work hard to find peace of mind, to find contentment. And so I did, but I never found what I thought I was looking for, because that's the real acid test. It's not us just saying, well, the inside out understanding is a principle and it's much better than everything else, because the acid test is, check it out for yourself. And as you said, and I love this, it just grounded you. It stopped the searching. And for me too. So I thought, yes, that makes sense. And it's so the point about it being true is, we don't need to try and persuade or sell the principles to anybody here, sell the inside out understanding. We really invite you to, if you're new to this, do your own experiments, just see what's true for you, check it out. It's because in our experience, the fact that it's true is it will show itself that the benefits will materialize if you have an open mind and give it a chance. So, yeah.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the theory of the disease concept and the evolution of understanding. So as I said a minute ago, theories evolve. We see a little more, we have a new way of seeing it. In my world of Lyme disease, I was working with a lot of doctors who were really outside the mainstream. And every time I would go, every 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something, they would have a totally new theory. And so we'd all rush to that side of the boat and, okay, we're going to try this, And so with the evolution of our understanding around addiction, initially it was, initially I guess people thought it was pretty holy, intoxication was very holy, and it was held to be a mystical experience in many religious and spiritual circles. And then it evolved over time, and it was laden with an overlay of morality, and became seen as a moral failing, and as a and then ultimately people were thrown in prison, debtor's prison. So there was a whole overlay of theory around that was influenced by culture and religion of the time. And then in a very kind way, there was an evolution in the 1940s, I guess, and help me with the dates if I'm wrong on that, but around that time, where they moved to much more compassionately see this as an illness that people needed help for. And so it was a real step forward in terms of our understanding of addiction and addiction theory. And it was much kinder in many ways. But now my experience of that is that, as many theories do, they create more problems than they solve. And at this point, I see the flaws, the significant flaws in having told an entire generation of addicts that they are damaged, because it's not true. People get well all the time. And part of my interest in pursuing this understanding in the field of addictions was because I was reading things where people were being told that they were incurable. That there was no hope and they were incurable, and the best they could hope for was a lifelong exploration of how broken they were and what they needed to do to be well. And that just really seemed so tragic to me that I just really turned my attention to it. And that's when Christian and I hooked up and decided to write the book. you know, it can be as well-intentioned as theories often are, and as absolutely well-intentioned as the evolution of addiction treatment as a disease was, and you know, it certainly opened our eyes to see things that, as we say in the book, you know, no one in their right mind would absolutely do this to themselves intentionally. No one would create this kind of thing. So it made perfect sense at that level of understanding. But now at the level of understanding we have evolved to, we can see a principle-based truth about the source of addiction. And that understanding can really set us free in a way that the disease concept really created more lack of freedom, and really almost a lifelong sentence of brokenness.
So I think that might be a nice place to pause, Barbara, and invite everybody